Hi people, welcome back to my channel. During the debates on CBC, we were promised that the new system would do away with our obsession with exams. I tried to explain that this is not the case because the exam obsession did not come from 844 and so it would not go away with CBC. In fact, I even said that with CBC, the amount of assessment and testing increases. I'm worried about competency-based education. It is increasing the amount of testing for students. We may not have a summative exam, but kids will be doing more and more tests in the classroom. I don't know whether that's what the parents wanted. When I tried to explain that exam obsession would not go away with CBC, Kenyans would not believe me because we were attached to the myth that exam obsession came from 844. So when KICD announced at the end of last year grade 3 assessment, Kenyans began to panic. They started to ask whether their children were ready for the upcoming examination. No matter how many times KICD tried to explain that this was an assessment, not an examination, Kenyans would not listen. Eventually, KICD started to blame Kenyans and say that exam obsession is a problem with Kenyans themselves. I hope we see a contradiction here. On one hand, we accept a new system which we are told cannot do away with the exam obsession, but we accept it because we think we will do away with that same exam obsession. But when the assessment comes later on, we refuse to see it as anything else but an examination. Do we really want exams to go away? What are exams for, and why do we have them? These are the questions that I'm going to answer in the video. My answer to this question will fall under four main themes. 1 is a ranking, 2 is control, 3 is hiring, and 4 is commerce. Now, ranking is made necessary because Kenya has very few opportunities for social advancement. Either there are not enough opportunities to get a good education, or there are not enough opportunities for employment. And even if we want to run our own business, running a business is still difficult. So to cushion ourselves from these difficulties in our very narrow system, we need exams to be able to decide who deserves more opportunities than the other. Ranking is also necessary for the private schools to advertise themselves as guarantees that your child attending that school will save them the trouble later on in life. So that is why you see when KCSE or KCPE results come out, you see advertisements in the papers from private schools showing the students who performed well, so as to promise parents that their children will get a guarantee to avoid difficulty later in life because they have passed exams. The second reason, control, applies to both teachers as employees and teachers as professionals. Controlling employees is a major component of power in the workplace. So you are able to control teachers by telling them that their promotion or any other favors will be given to them based on their exam results. And this way you can keep teachers from asking questions about the professional use of some of the directives because they need to pass exams at the end of the year. The second element of control has to do with the covering of the syllabus and the teacher's professional work in the classroom. Normally, in a normal free environment in a classroom, teachers should be able to interpret a curriculum and draw their own examples and examples from the surrounding environment to help students and kids internalize a certain concept. But people in the central government who do not want that kind of liberty among the students want to make sure that children are not taught to think for themselves, but to remain within the confines given to them from Nairobi. So you do this by insisting that the syllabus must be covered in a certain way so that children will pass exams. And this system of control ends up being enforced not only from Nairobi, but from the children and the parents themselves. Because even if a teacher discovers that they need to go outside a little bit from the curriculum to explain a certain concept, both the parents and their children will say, we don't care whether this is important, what matters is what will come in the exam. So exams are a way of controlling our interpretation of the syllabus, our ability to use our environment and our own examples to understand any content that is being taught in the class. Exams are also another way of outsourcing hiring of employees to the school. Rather than have apprenticeships and mentoring at the workplace, you outsource that cost of doing that work to the school by insisting that the certificates which the school produces must certify employees who can enter the workplace and without any orientation and without any adjustment, they are able to perform as the employers want. Now, this system started with the colonial government because they are the ones who instituted exams so as to choose the civil servants that they wanted to come to the colonies and implement the imperial project here. But soon it has become also a way of employers trying to decide whether the employees they are getting from the school system are suitable. And when they complain about graduates not being ready for the workplace, what they are really saying is that they don't want to invest in mentoring and helping their employees adjust. They just want the school to take care of all the work skills that are necessary for the employers. And this is quite an unfair system because a school that teaches hundreds of thousands cannot prepare individual students to be prepared for individual and specific workplaces. But again, like I'm saying here, this kind of demand is being made so that the employers do not have to spend on mentoring and molding the kind of employees that they want. When it comes to commerce, I'm referring to the fact that private schools depend on the reputation of their students doing well, who do well in exams. And this applies not just to private schools, but even to the public elite schools. These schools maintain their prestige by their exam results they produce at the end of every year. And this is why you see in the newspapers, like I've said, advertisements of schools announcing the kinds of results that their students scored in the examination. But there's also an interest of publishers in maintaining the exam system. You'll notice that textbooks and even just ordinary storybooks always have KCSE or KCPE written on the cover. So because they know that parents are obsessed with exams, they know that they can make money for their books by stamping their books with these with the names of these examinations. We are already familiar with the consequences of exams since we complain about them quite a bit. Now, the first is the obvious, the rote learning and cramming. When we have exams, we are forced to memorize instead of internalize information so that we can repeat it in the exams. I hope we notice that this is a form of mental violence because we are working against what our minds were created to naturally do. Remember when we talked about the mind being a muscle, we said that the mind is designed to think, to be creative, and to imagine. But what we do when we are doing rote learning and cramming is restricting the ability of our mind and giving it limits of where it can go. And this, as I've said, is a form of violence, which brings me to the second consequence, which is violence. Uh, Exams make schools have to force us to limit our imagination, but even that to control our bodies. Hence, we have the timetables, the bells ringing, the having to sit at desks very still, and even now having to put children in front of laptops so that we can justify their attending a school and paying fees. And this violence is not just about the physical control of students. It also becomes punitive when we punish students with physical force because of how they perform exams. And in the university system, it becomes a form of violence that is expressed through, for example, sexual harassment and blackmail, where we tell young people that if they want to pass exams, they must do certain unethical favors for us. And even we see the police being sent to universities when students start to ask questions which we adults who have decided to become accustomed to the system are uncomfortable with. The third is linked to the violence, which is social inequality. Exams reinforce social inequality because if we miss places in schools, then we are basically being told that we do not deserve a good education or good social services, and we deserve to be always in trouble with the state or to always offer our work to the people in power. And this, in turn, reinforces dishonesty in members of the public, because we train people to see that there is no justice for all of us, but only for a select few. And it becomes a form of rigging, actually. And so people start to cheat in exams and cheat in other spheres of life so that they can get a social cushion from the troubles of poverty. So how did we get into this crazy system? The answer has something to do with bees and with Victorian England. To understand how we arrived at a society that requires exams, it is important for us to understand the structure of British society in the 19th century, because that was the structure they brought here when they colonized us. Now, I'm going to attach a picture entitled The British Beehive, which was drawn in the 19th century and is supposed to depict the structure of British society at the time. The links to the picture and to a video that explains this picture are found below. Basically, what this means is that power and wealth in British society was decided by where you were born rather than by effort. Because when it is the royal family that is on top by virtue of being born into the right family, then even the other layers of society will have to, in some way, refer back to that element of lineage. And of course, there was need for such a system, because remember, during the 19th century there were great changes happening. The industrial society was coming up. There were people with machines who were able to manufacture products and make money without necessarily having been born in the right family. So there was an emerging middle class, or an emerging class of wealthy people who did not come from families that were traditionally rich and wealthy because they belonged to the aristocracy. So this was a threat to the people at the top who made their wealth by inheritance. So how do you deal with these people? You tell them that there's something, because there's something special about you as an aristocrat. Everybody else who wants the same status you have has to meet some kind of standard for them to prove themselves worthy of rising up the social ranks. And how do you do this? You do this through education and exams. So for example, all the members of the middle class who are now able to afford a type of education that was similar to that of aristocrats now had to pass exams for them to be admitted to the aristocratic institutions like Oxford and Cambridge. But we also need to remember that this was around the time when they were coming to Africa to colonize us. So even the people who would join Her Majesty's imperial government were people who had to prove themselves worthy by passing these exams. So the people who came here came with that culture that if you wanted to join government, if you wanted to have privileges under the colonial system, you had to have proven yourself worthy, and you did this through exams. So even the Africans who wanted to avoid forced labor under colonial government, who wanted the privileges they were seeing in colonial society, and especially with the European settlers, they saw exams as a way to ascend the ladder. The other thing I need to remind you is that because exams were for deciding power and social rank rather than intelligence, even in the 19th century when exams started, there was still a problem with integrity of examinations. And for example, one of the things that the colonial administration did was to give preference to people from Oxford and Cambridge in the government. So even if the results did not reflect the dominance of people from these schools, their results were, let's call it, massaged so that they are able to join government. So this shows us two things about examinations in Kenya. Number one is that examinations are not ultimately, the end goal is not about intelligence or academic performance, but about rising through the social ranks. And the second thing is that because of this system, even cheating becomes part and parcel of the exam process. So when people promise us that they can use the police to remove cheating in exams, they are selling us a fantasy, because as long as exams are used to decide who becomes a doctor and who becomes a cleaner, then people are going to try and game the system and find other ways of getting good results. So in actual fact, it's not even the exams that are a form of cheating in society. It's at the very top, the idea that people can gain wealth and power through no work of their own, but through the work of others, just because they were born in the right family, is already a lie, and that lie produces the results that you see, the inequality that you see in our education system, which is perpetuated through examinations. What do we need to do to get rid of this clearly messed up system? It's definitely not going to be a new curriculum or a new school system. What we need is a restructuring of work, because as long as people feel desperate to do anything that the system wants so that they can get a shot at life, we're going to see people giving up their right to learn by getting used to switching off their minds and learning and cramming for exams, or people who want to pay for exam leakage or even bribe to get into the right school. In short, I am saying that we need to go back to work as an expression of our dignity, our creativity, and our love. This is our DNA. We were created to do these things through work. So when we have a class of people who earn a living through work they do not do, we have a group of anti-human people, and this anti-humanness spreads to the rest of us, especially when we are talking about people who have wealth and power. How do we do this practically? I would say that we need to restructure work so that people have a say in the entire process, from when they plan for the work to when they do it, to even having a say over the product of their work. Remember in the Kazi ni Maisha series, I talked about a farmer, Elisha Bwatuti, who did all the work of buying cows and constructing the shed and feeding the cows and doing everything, and then he couldn't even get access to what was due to him because of the work he did. This kind of theft and of stealth is responsible for the unequal society we have and for the desperation people feel to pass exams by any means necessary. We also need to remove the division within professions. For example, why are teachers who teach the children paid differently, and why do they receive a different respect from people who teach in the universities? And yet all of them are teachers. These are the kinds of the divisions that we need to think about and eliminate so that everybody feels that they are contributing to society, whether they are teaching children or teaching adults. We also need more democratic infusion into our work. We need the public to be able to debate on technical, moral, and professional issues, and not assume that because somebody has a big certificate from a big university, they should dictate to the rest of society what to do in a certain field. Everything should be subject to public debate because every knowledge ends up having an impact on society. We should also think of other ways of educating our people. We do not need to be stuck and handcuffed to this industrial, violent, British-oriented system. There are other ways of learning, like apprenticeship, mentoring, peer learning, that can teach just as well as, and if not better, than going to a structured school. We need to explore these kinds of learning, and we need to value the people who mentor and help raise another generation of people who are good in a certain skill, or people who help society in a certain way. I know some of these proposals that I have made sound radical, but they're not really radical when you think about it, because it's about returning to what is natural to us as human beings. We need dignity, we are naturally creative, and we want to express love for one another, and this should happen through work. And one way in which we express our humanity and our dignity is through telling our stories. We need to tell our stories about work, about what makes us have dignity and feel valued. We need to affirm our somebodyness, as Martin Luther King said. So normally I end with saying, please be in touch, please subscribe. But this time I'm also going to say, let's tell our stories, because stories are empowering and they make us ground ourselves in the world and in reality. We start to see how we relate to one another. So you could either tell me your stories or you tell somebody, but tell your story. Always tell your story, because your story matters. Thank you for watching.